That's what I believe should happen in a couple of weeks. I think viewers may have seen this before. I wore it during the Waltz Vance debate. Um, Quick disclaimer on this: I'm not like a massive fanboy or something. Frankly, it's a historical piece of merchandise, right? It's a historic election, and I do support Kamala Harris, so that's that. But I don't go around sporting this wherever I go, kind of thing. It's not like that. I have actually a Barack Obama T-shirt from '08, so it's not unprecedented. Um, I want to touch on something that I think Harris really needs to do in the coming weeks, if she hasn't done so already, which is to really reach out beyond her base. Now, I think so far the Democrats have done a better job of reaching out. I mean, in this particular campaign, the Harris Waltz campaign, um, and we can see that from the fact that there's been far more senior Republicans have gone to the Harris campaign than senior Democrats have gone the other way. The most they can cite is Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy Jr., neither of whom have actually been in the Democratic Party for some time. So I really don't think they've much to shout about. Um, Trump does well with young men. He is leading on that. Harris does better with women. So there is a gender divide. Um, but one thing I've liked about the Harris campaign is precisely the fact that she hasn't actually played identity politics. She's been careful about that. You know, of course she spoke about women's issues. Of course she spoke about minority issues. But what I like about Kamala Harris is she doesn't go around saying, I'm a black woman candidate. She doesn't do that. Maybe some of her supporters do, but she doesn't. And if we look back to 2008, Barack Obama didn't go around saying, I'm a black candidate. I think they both realize, I'm talking about Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, both realize as politicians that that sort of identity politics just polarizes people. I mean, if she wins, it will be a very historic thing. She'll be the first woman president and the first Asian American president, because of her Indian heritage, the first biracial woman president. There'll be a lot of firsts, but particularly the first woman president. That will be a big thing, and that's it will be a big thing. It's historic. But I do like the fact that Harris hasn't went down that line. She knows that every vote counts. She knows that in this year's swing states, places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, every single vote counts. So it would make absolutely no sense to just play to her own base, i.e., California liberals or what have you. That that would be, I think, very foolish for a presidential campaign. Even her selection of Tim Walz. Now, I know the Republicans have tried to portray him as actually extreme left, but he has Midwest written all over him. He's just, that was a clever move, I think, in her running mate to pick him as a running mate. If she had picked another woman, if she had picked a minority person, it would have looked like far too radical a ticket. So what does she do? She picks a Midwest white guy. That's I mean, I don't like the identity politics that goes on in America, but I understand where it can be practical. Um, but what I think Harris also needs to do if she gets into the White House and her administration going forward, obviously there'll be a progressive element there. You cannot detach that from the Democratic Party, and it goes without saying there is a strong woke contingent in the Democratic base. It is interesting, though, recently there's been fractures, particularly over Israel and Gaza. There is very deep anger out there amongst left wing students against Biden and Harris for their continued support for Israel. But if we look at, the culture wars, I want to see Harris distance herself from that a little bit. I'm not saying for a second that she can totally detach herself from that part of the Democratic Party. And dare I say, Harris probably has some of it herself. I actually don't think she's a far left radical. I don't think she's actually that woke compared to some. but I'm sure there's times in her career she's used some of that language. But the fact is, she hasn't done it in this campaign, and that's what I like. You know, if Harris has went out and spoken about white privilege and things like that, I'd say that is an absolute vote killer. All you're doing is polarizing white voters. That's stupid. She hasn't done that. Um, there are some parallels here with Keir Starmer's Labour in the UK. I will be talking about that because they've just passed the 100 days mark, so I will be making a video on that. But you know, in this election, Democrats have beat their drums a lot about the democracy issue, and I think that's important. Trump, I believe, is a threat to democracy. He's showing it because he's a sore loser, and he's actively tried to interfere in election results. So I think he is a threat to democracy. But the reality is that is not the number one and number two thing that people care about. Things that people care about. What voters care about is issues like immigration and the economy. Those seem to be the two major issues. Um, I know yesterday Harris made an announcement over supporting black business, particularly with the aim of helping black American men, because that's actually a demographic apparently she's lagging in. Apparently Trump's actually doing better in that regard, which is interesting and some would say unexpected. So it makes sense for a presidential candidate to make more effort in a demographic he or she is dragging in. I can't see Trump doing the same thing. Can't see Trump trying to reach out to groups that he hasn't been strong on. Um, you know, in a fight like there's that expression, who wants it more? It almost looks like Harris wants us more because I think she's working a lot harder to actually reach out. Um, but there are things I dislike about the Democratic Party. Much like the Labour Party in the UK, there is an aspect of the Democrats that is an extremely intolerant far left wokeism, which is it's utterly obnoxious, sanctimonious, hypocritical. It's something I really have no time for because more often than not, those who preach that they're anti-racist and they are anti-sexist and so on, they have absolutely no problem making generalized vilifications of basically white straight men. I mean, that might sound, I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm a victim because I'm a white straight man. I'm not saying that, but I do think that the so-called progressive left, they seem to think the white straight men are the only group um, which warrants, you know, it's okay to be bigoted against. You just see this mindset. It's really regressive and polarizing. Um, and I think Harris, you know, I think she's smart. I think she knows that this is not a way to get votes. She knows that she has to pitch to blue collar working men, many of whom are white. She knows that. Um, Many unions have supported her campaign. So I think that she is more intelligent political operator than some are giving her credit for. We'll see what happens, of course, in a few weeks. This race, unfortunately, is neck and neck. I can't comprehend that. I think if a convicted felon like Donald Trump gets back into the White House, it would say a lot about the state of American democracy. But, you know, Harris has been vice president for 4 years and people are struggling. So it's all very well to talk about joy and optimism, but she does need to deliver concrete, lay out concrete plans as to how she's going to improve people's lives. To be fair, I think she has been trying to do that when she's been meeting people. But nevertheless, a big part of the pitch of her campaign is about joy and optimism. That has its place, but Americans need more than that. You know, if you are a struggling family business in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Arizona, um, talk of joy at the Democratic National Convention isn't going to give you much reassurance. They need to see concrete, actual actions. I think as a person, Harris is a much more decent human being than Trump, and I do think the character matters. I think Trump's devoid of integrity, whereas I think Kamala Harris, whatever shortcomings she may have had, and like everyone, she's had flaws. I believe she once had an affair, for example, things like that. It's honestly, if you scratch beneath the surface, you'll find faults in every politician, every person. But frankly, I like Kamala Harris. I get a good impression from her overall. Um, and if I was a voter, one of the big things that would concern me is crime. The thing about Kamala Harris, she was a prosecutor. She put away dangerous criminals. So the Trump campaign cannot accuse her of being soft on crime because her record is the exact opposite. The Democratic Party has factions whereby people have called for defunding the police, and they have, totally endorsed the Black Lives Matter movement, which I think has seriously racist components. I think it's a movement that shot itself in the foot because they had strong arguments regarding police accountability, but they went too far. They just became a racist movement against white people in general. Um, and they came out with some really toxic attitudes. They also failed to recognize the problem of black criminality, which is a problem in America. In big American cities, that is just a fact of life. And saying so is not racist. Black Lives Matter not only fails to recognize that, they actively promote prominent criminals like George Floyd. So it's really I think that Harris would do well to distance herself from those sort of divisive movements, but it's hard. The Democratic Party is a big party, and there are going to be factions there, much like the Labour Party in the UK, that are quite far left. And she knows that she can't totally. I mean, the American system is not quite like the UK system. The presidential nominee is not the leader of the party. Harris has no say in various Democratic caucuses. She cannot dictate that these people shouldn't be in our party or something like that. She can't do that. But what she can do is make clear what sort of president she wants to be. What I would like to see is a centrist. I would like to see almost a third way operator in the Bill Clinton mold. I'm not saying I want Kamala Harris to be Bill Clinton. Clinton had its flaws, not least his numerous sexual escapades, but I think that is something that would unify America more than um, sort of radical progressiveness. I really think that would do a lot more harm than good. Because if you want to reach out to wavering Trump voters, the way to do it is not to tell them that they're enjoying white privilege. All that will do is piss them off and make them gravitate further towards Trump. So I really believe that. I really think that she needs to talk about bread and butter issues, and to be fair, she mostly has. She's been talking about the cost of living. She's been talking about the economy and things that people care about, like immigration. Probably she could go even further on that. I mean, when she's in Arizona, for example, at the border state, she needs to really, really talk about what they're going to do to secure the border, not just criticize Trump, but talk about what she will do as president. There is some debate over what culpability she had as vice president in that regard. Um, but that's what she needs to go to, because then Trump will just pick up votes saying, look, Harris is weak on the border. Um, and it's all very well to talk about Trump's obnoxious statements, but in the end of the day, if someone had a loved one murdered by an MS-13 gang member who got over the border, understandably, they're going to be angry with the presiding administration, which is the Democrats. I mean, I would be angry. In Democrat-run cities, there is a problem with crime. I spoke recently about Trump insulting Detroit, which was pretty stupid because that's the city he was speaking in. um, Detroit apparently has lowering crime rates, fair enough, but it cannot be denied the Democrat run cities have a problem. Los Angeles has a chronic homeless problem. New York City has seen a rise in crime again. It had enjoyed a lowering crime rate for some time frankly, under Giuliani and Bloomberg, a Republican and independent respectively. Under Eric Adams, crime rates have went up again, in part because of the attitude of taking migrant convoys from Texas. There's other factors as well. I don't want to simplify it to just that. But, you see a situation in New York City where white women are being attacked by black guys. This isn't wolf whistle. This is happening, right? And people will say, that's what's happening under a Democratic mayor. And the problem with the Democrats then is if you talk about that, oh well, you're vilifying black men. You're stigmatizing black men, but why isn't that seen as a hate crime? It should be. You can imagine if some white racist went around assaulting black women, it would be absolutely, there'd be huge protests. It would be a huge thing. So, in talking about America's social problems, particularly crime, one thing I think is hugely overlooked is hate crime against white people, frankly, by black offenders. Why is that massively overlooked? We hear about hate crime against black people, and yes, it does happen. For example, the Buffalo mass shooting was definitely a terrible event. 10 black people murdered by a white racist, and the same thing happened in Charleston, South Carolina, a few years before that. Dylan Roof case I'm talking about. But when white people are victims of black offenders, there's a media silence. It does not get the same attention. Um, So I think Harris, I'm not saying she needs to get into the nuances of these things, but she needs to really, really go out of her way to govern for all Americans as best she can. I mean, she's not going to please everyone, it isn't going to happen, but I think the way to do that is to go down the centrist route and to say, okay, there is this woke contingent in our party, there is this radical progressive contingent, and I can't ignore them. I have to pick up some of their concerns because back in 2020, they said they lent their support to Biden and they've subsequently been angered by his support for Israel. So, she can't take it for granted. But I think it would be wrong to just pander to that faction because if you pander to the sort of woke left wing students who are talking about white privilege, all you're going to do is polarize Mr. Blue Collar in rural West Virginia or rural Michigan, urban Michigan for that matter. So the point I'm making is governing the United States is an incredibly hard job. It's a big country, 330 million people, the third most populous country in the world's most powerful country. It is probably the hardest job in the world. Although I would suggest Antonio Guterres, as UN Secretary General, has a pretty difficult job as well. But yes, I think that if I was an American voter, I'd absolutely vote for Harris because I cannot stomach the idea of Trump getting back into power. But it would be with the caveat that I hope she pitches out, not just to the woke left, because I really don't like the woke left. I think they're very intolerant and hypocritical in the way they go about things. That's my take. I really, really, really hope she wins this election because if she doesn't, I do think Donald Trump is, he's vowed revenge on his opponents. He's threatened to dismantle NATO. Compulsive lying is bad enough, but I do think the man's dangerous, and I think he's mentally unstable. I genuinely believe that. I'm not saying it as like insulting him. I genuinely believe he's probably mentally unstable. That's not someone who should be in the White House.